Good morning. The House Transportation Committee for Tuesday, March 28th, 2023 is now in session. Mr. Clerk, please call the roll.
Representatives Beck, Burkhart, Butler, Campbell, Camper, Carr, Cochran, Darby, Davis, Glenn, Grills, Harris, Hazelwood, Hicks, Marsh, Martin, Powell, Powers, Rudd, Russell, Towns, Whitson, Wright, Vice Chairman Vital, Chairman Howell.
Here.
Mr. Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Any personal orders or announcements from the committee? Seeing none, do we have any visitors? Seeing none. Members, we have a very short calendar today, only 3 bills. We'll begin with item number 1, House Bill 445. Chairman Whitson is running that bill this morning. We have a motion to second, Chairman Whitson, and you are recognized. We're on the bill as amended.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With your permission, can I present from my desk here?
You certainly may.
Okay, I'm getting close to 70 every day, so this would be nice.
Don't want to overdo it.
Okay. In 2020, on House Bill 445 committee, in 2021, we passed a law requiring TDOT to issue permits for local law enforcement officers to post automatic license plate readers, LPRs, on state right-of-ways. This bill simply clarifies that the existing process to make sure that these LPRs used to track fleeing suspects or search for missing people via Amber or Silver alerts, an option for local law enforcement. Basically, what this does is give TDOT permission for municipalities to find vendors who meet the federal standards and state standards for LPRs to purchase basically a lower cost system to put on state right-of-ways inside the municipalities. That's the scope of this bill, nothing more. With that, Mr. Chairman, I renew my motion.
Thank you, Chairman. Members, you've heard the explanation from the sponsor. Any questions from committee? Representative Cochran.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, sponsor. So have we narrowed the definition of surveillance camera in this version?
You're recognized.
Right. Currently, already in statute under TCA 55-10-302, it really actually identifies these as LPRs. I do have an amendment that it may or may not be needed to specify that these only applies to LPRs. I have not moved to put that amendment on the bill because in talking to TDOT, it's actually not needed. But if it makes this representative more comfortable, we can do that.
You recognize.
And I appreciate that. Just one other quick follow-up. So does this bill, does it expand the usage of these? So I guess my question is, currently, can local law enforcement use these already? Does it expand the usage of them, or does it just enable more vendors? That's kind of what I was trying to figure out.
Chairman.
Good question. Right now, cities and municipalities can use these, but they cannot use them on state right-of-way unless they go through the process with TDOT to get the application process approved to make sure they meet the standards, not only state standards, but federal standards. And Mr. Chairman and Leader, I could request to go out of session and we can explain that more with some witnesses we have today.
Without objection, would that be something you would?
Briefly,
Okay.
Yeah, that's okay.
We are out of session, and we do have some witnesses that are on the list, and let's call up both TDOT and safety and let them answer the questions as needed. If you'd please identify yourself for the record and who you're with. Jay, you recognize.
Thank you, Chairman. Jay Klein, Director of Legislation for TDOT.
And
Elizabeth Stroker, Legislative Director, Department of Safety.
okay. Well, let's begin. Who has a question? Representative Cochran.
I'll just kind of restate. So if either or both of you can explain, tell me what this bill does. So if they can use them now, how does this change the way that they use them? If they can use them on state right-of-way now, how does this change that? Can they not use them on state right-of-way now? Give me the 5 points. What does this do?
You're recognized.
Thanks, Chairman. Leader, happy to assist there. So a few years back, you all passed legislation allowing for the department to establish a process to permit the placement of automated license plate readers along state right-of-way. It's my understanding that our local law enforcement partners already had that authority along their local routes, but that legislation was needed for the state routes. So that legislation was passed a couple of years ago. The department initiated essentially a application process, a permitting process, but the language that was in code was fairly open-ended as to what that process would look like. And so there were several different requirements that were put in place, for Department of Transportation concerns with making sure that installed properly along our right of way, and making sure that we kind of know who has what where. But one of the requirements that was put in place as a part of our application process was that those cameras were purchased off of a statewide contract that the state has, and so that there is it is a single vendor. That contract was procured competitively, but it is just one vendor, and so that was a requirement. I believe, and certainly don't want to speak for the sponsor, but I believe that the intent of this legislation is just to clarify that process and to specify in code what the expectation of the General Assembly is for the requirements of the devices themselves, as opposed to the more open-ended statute that is in current law. So without this legislation, there's still the authority to place automated license plate readers along state right-of-way. This legislation merely just speaks to the requirements of the devices themselves, and instead of leaving it more open-ended for the executive branch, places in code the expectations of the General Assembly for what those devices, in terms of standards that they must meet.
You're recognized.
And then just one quick follow-up. So essentially, I heard you mention the one vendor. Is the hope that this allows for locals to go for multiple vendors? Is that kind of the ultimate goal, that we get away from the one single vendor on state contract, that this maybe gives them more options? Is that the...
You're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman. Leader, again, not wanting to speak for the sponsor, but I believe that is what the sponsor has alluded to, that so long as a vendor and their device could meet the requirements that are laid out in this legislation, that then the local law enforcement would be able to proceed with an application or a permit with the department for placement along state right-of-way.
Thank you.
Leader Camper, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question about the how long the information is maintained at the local level or at the departmental level. When we passed this before, I think every 30 days, the information would just roll off and there was no real storing of data. Is that still true within this legislation?
You're recognized. Ms.
Yes.
Stoker, would you like to?
Yeah, so it is currently in code. None of that is changing. It is a 90-day retention policy, and then it must be destroyed.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Sorry, I will add, unless it's part of a criminal investigation, of course, we can't destroy evidence.
You're recognized.
Thank you. I understood that point. Thanks.
Chairman Grills.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That pretty much was one of my questions, just to reiterate. Obviously, I appreciate the fact that we're going to have more opportunities to save dollars in the state. So for that, I'm grateful. I just have a fundamental disagreement with these LPRs, and I think that we're getting too close to a surveillance state, and that's what the Chinese have done to their people, and that just makes me nervous. So any chance I get the opportunity to make these remarks, I want to take the opportunity to do that. However, I do think that this legislation does save dollars. So for that, I'm torn internally. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Chairman Marsh.
I just have a comment. I'm like Chairman Grills, but I also think that if my wife or my children or grandchildren were abducted, I wouldn't take anything for having these cameras there to catch whoever was doing that. So I think it's really a good plan if we use it correctly. I appreciate you bringing it. Thank you.
Vice Chairman Vital.
Very quickly, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do want to reiterate what Chairman Gill said. In the area of senior care, as it relates to Silver Alert, this is a valuable tool. In those first 24 hours, when a senior shows up lost or with Alzheimer's or dementia, it has been proven that it's an important way of tracking them and helping find them. But I am concerned about the overall surveillance methodology that we're moving towards. But they do save lives. And so used properly, like most things, we need to use them in moderation. Thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And for safety, really the only time a license plate will pop is if y'all to show up on the system, if it's for a silver alert, amber alert, or a license plate has been identified in conjunction with a crime. That's the only time that law enforcement will put those plate numbers into the system. And if those plates show up on this LPR, that's when the information is generated, correct?
You reckon?
Correct. So if it were just mine or your license plate that got captured, nothing would happen since we are not in a database for someone who is fleeing from a crime or a wanted criminal or someone who is either missing or has an alert on them. So correct. It would only trigger if it were someone who is already entered as being missing or wanted for a criminal offense.
Follow up?
And only authorized individuals in the Department of Safety or a local law enforcement agency can put that data in there to look for that particular plate, correct?
You reckon?
Correct. And specifically for the Department of Safety, we have very strict requirements on who can access that data. It's very limited in when it can be stored and when it can be destroyed. So you are correct. It is very, very heavily monitored on who can enter and who can access that data.
And there is serious consequences for any individual who enters a data to find a plate that's not in accordance with the regulations and the laws to look for a particular plate, correct?
You reckon?
I can only speak for THP, but our policies, yes, if you get caught using it inappropriately, you are going to have some serious consequences.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Safety.
Chair Lady Hazelwood.
Thank you. And my question was related to that, and I'm going to assume an answer, but about assuming, so I'll ask you to specifically say, I'm assuming based on what you just said that there is a record, there is a way to track who input this data and sought that information so that if it were used improperly, you'd be able to tell how the data got into the system. Is that correct?
You reckon?
Correct. There are usernames associated with it, and we would have a record of if someone used it inappropriately, who that person was and when.
And does anything in this legislation require local law enforcement to do the same?
I wanted to make sure I was recognized.
And I didn't.
I can only speak for our Department of Safety policies and procedures. I don't know 100% what the local requirements are. Jay may correct me here, so I'll let him answer.
Jay.
Chairman, thank you. Chair Lady, this legislation doesn't particularly speak to that, but the existing statute doesn't necessarily either. Again, it's just defining out the requirements for the device.
I'm sorry, I forgot. There is a law that was passed. I believe Representative Gillespie passed it a couple years ago that deals with the protection of records relative to LPR data, and it is held very confidential and cannot be subject to inspection or cannot be released, and there are retention policies. So all law enforcement agencies would be held to that standard that's currently in code.
Thank you.
Good. Any other questions? Chairman Grills.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this is kind of going off maybe a little far-fetched, but at the same time, we've seen some of these technologies that we have on our phones that the Chinese and other foreign countries are able to hack into. Are there any chances that some of these technologies that we're using now coming from foreign countries could possibly be accessed by foreign countries or those who have nefarious activities?
You reckon?
I can only speak for THP. I know that our contracts are heavily secured with the state tech system, for lack of a better phrasing. So I don't want to say yes or no 100% because I don't know the tech of it, but our goal with this and limited to the vendors that can be used and where the products come from, that yes, hopefully there would be no chance of hacking or stealing data.
You recognize?
So these vendors will be approved by the federal government. So we have a lot more security knowing that these people are vetted and they don't have ill intentions toward the U.S. citizens. It's a good idea. Thank you all.
Chairman Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to say there's a Driver Privacy Protection Act that all law enforcement officers has to go by, and there's serious consequences for violating that act.
All right, have we exhausted the questions for our witnesses? Thank you very much. Appreciate the confirmations. We are back in session, and we're back on the bill. Chairman Whitson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I do appreciate and understand your concerns, Chairman Grills. I share that concern also, and I just like to say cameras used under this act must comply with the TCA as currently written, and therefore can only be automated license plate readers and not any other type of surveillance camera. It also guarantees that any LPR used must meet the National Defense Authorization Act, making sure no device may contain spyware or otherwise share Tennessee's information with foreign governments. These LPRs meet the highest possible security standards for privacy protection. And I do appreciate your concerns and question on that, sir.
Question has been called on the bill without objection. We're voting on House Bill 445. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. Ayes have it. The bill goes to Calendar and Rules.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee.
We're on item number 2, House Bill 776. We have a motion on the bill. Chairman Holtzclaw, you are recognized. I believe we have an amendment. Is that correct?
Yes, tracking code 6033.
We have a question on the amendment and a second. And we're voting on adding the amendment as soon as I turn my phone off. Adding the amendment to the bill. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. Ayes have it. The amendment is on the bill. Chairman, you're recognized.
Well, I hope you can, my voice is kind of a little weak right now, but I hope you can understand me. Basically, what this does. Question on the bill.
You want to renew your motion?
What it does, it ensures the minimum exposure time of the yellow light for 3 seconds. And we worked with the Department of Safety, and I'll agree with it. It just ensures that certain entities can't, a state agency or a public political subdivision can't shorten that time. And that's due to traffic violations and those kind of things. So
Very
that's
good.
what the bill does.
Any questions? Chairman Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, sponsor, for discussing this with me last week at the House floor. I do have a question. I don't know if it's for you or legal, but I was trying to figure out what the difference is between this bill and what's already in 558110A8, where it says whenever in this state 3 light traffic control signals are used displaying successfully green, yellow, and red lights for the direction of motorists and pedestrians, the minimum time exposure of the yellow light shall be 3 seconds.
You're recognized.
We can go to legal and see what he's got.
Want to go to legal? All right. We're out of session. Legal, would you clarify that question, please?
Sure. Joel Hayes, Office of Legal Services. So Chairman Russell, the minimum 3 seconds is still in code, but this clarifies that the duration must be also determined using engineering practices as identified in the federal manual on uniform traffic control devices. So that's if it's based on speed, placement of the light, if the duration of the light, according to that manual, maybe require more than 3 seconds, that just that 3 second standard is the only standard used. That instead, engineering considerations under the federal manual also should be determining maybe how long that light should be in excess of that 3 seconds.
So it will
You're
be
right.
in the TCA code book twice under this same statute for the 3 seconds.
It's replacing, so the 3 seconds will stay in place, but it's also giving that additional caveat that it also needs to be determined according to engineering standards under the federal MUTCD.
At one time, it's a maximum of 7 seconds. Does it have anything to do with that?
There's no reference in the code as to the maximum amount of time.
Okay, thank you.
Did you have a question, Chair Lady Hazelwood?
It was related, and I believe that was just answered. Basically, what we're doing here is setting a minimum, a floor. The maximum that would be determined by the engineering codes and that sort of thing. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Any other questions while we're out of session? Seeing none, we'll go back in session, and Chairman, you recognize.
I renew my motion.
Okay. We are voting on House Bill 776. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. Ayes have it. Your bill goes to government operations, sir.
I'm the age where I'm, above puberty.
It's always a joy having you in this committee, sir. We are moving on to item number 3, House Bill 685 by Representative Freeman. Representative Freeman, you recognize. Did I hear a motion and a second on the bill? I have a motion, second on the bill, and I believe we have 2 amendments, sir.
Yes, sir. I've got drafting code 555 or 5550 and 6342.
Okay, let's take them one at a time. All in favor of adding 5550 to the bill, say aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. That amendment is on the bill, and the other one is 6342.
6342.
We have a motion and a second on that bill. We're voting on the amendment. All in favor, aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. Ayes have it. Please explain your bill as amended, sir.
Thank you, sir. So here in Nashville, we produce a report annually on dangerous roads and dangerous intersections. It allows us to prioritize where we spend our road dollars. What this does is effectively requires TDOT to do the same thing. They would identify locations on state and local government roads where injuries to bicyclists and pedestrians are elevated in comparison to statewide averages. Requires TDOT to work with law enforcement agencies and highway safety offices to submit a report of its findings and recommendations regarding the development of a strategic plan to the chairs of the Transportation Committee of the House of Representatives and the chair of in the Senate, and then also send that same report to the top 5 localities that have the highest number of pedestrian and safety problems. And with
Very
that,
good.
stand ready for
Members, you've
questions.
heard the explanation from the sponsor. Any questions for the sponsor? Chairman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And to the sponsor, are we not already, is TDOT not already providing this information? I know that we see a lot of reports that are coming through, and I thought I had seen one where they were, looking at the number and the frequency. Are they already providing this, or is this changing?
They provide some of that. This require. I mean, it's not a requirement for them to provide this to the chair of the transportation and come up with recommendations. So they may be providing some of it, but this just makes sure that it's clear.
All right. Thank you.
Any other questions? And to the sponsor, I understand you have worked with TDOT on this and discussed it with them.
Yeah.
Very good. Chairman Vital.
To the sponsor, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Are we specifically trying to identify those hazardous areas for bicyclers, which has been, those accidents have increased dramatically across the state? I know other accidents are addressed here. We do track that information, but are we focusing on that one area there a little bit more specifically?
That's one part of it. The other one is pedestrian safety. And not just in Nashville, but in rural parts of the state, we've got people that are walking to work, that are, walking on an unsafe road. And this just allows us to be able to identify where those places are. So as a state, we can begin to prioritize our state dollars to make sure that we're taking care of our citizens as best we can.
Thank you. Just as a follow-up on that, cycling has become a very popular passive activity across the state. Many of our roadways in rural areas don't have shoulders. So I do think this is very valuable information that could help us as we increase our tourism and agri dollars being spent to encourage people to get out and ride bikes and enjoy some of our scenic places. So thank you for this information.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the sponsor? Seeing none, without objection, we're voting on House Bill 685. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. Ayes have it. Your bill goes to calendar and rules, sir.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Members, that brings us to the end of Chairman Carr. You're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to, before you close this committee out, to say I appreciate you and all that the Transportation Committee has done this year, especially right on up through the subcommittee, all the way up to this committee. This committee has been run as one of the most efficient committees that we've had this year, and I appreciate your leadership and your guidance and your understanding on a lot of these technical issues that we've had come before us. And as you know, it's always our goal here in transportation, not only to provide the best roads, but also the safest roads and safest means for our citizens of Tennessee. And I just wanted to thank you for all your leadership this year, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Carr. That's very kind. Appreciate you. And on a personal note, I want to say how much I appreciate each one of you. You each bring unique insight and skills to each one of the bills that we've considered. You ask great questions, in-depth questions, and I'm always amazed at some of the questions that are asked that I never think of. And I think it's a wonderful committee. I'm honored to serve as your chairman, and it's an honor to serve with you. And we've done some good work this year. We've done some really good work this year, and work that we should all be proud of. And so it's an honor for me to serve alongside you. Chairman Whitson.
Thank you, Chairman. And I just want to echo Chairman Carr's comments. This is a great team in here on this committee. Every member in here, I'm just proud to serve with. And but in the Army, we call it command climate that makes the difference. And Chairman, you have established what we call a great command climate for us to tackle some tough legislation, and your guidance and leadership is to be commended, sir. And I'm proud to serve with you.
Thank you, Chairman Whitson. Any other questions? I want to acknowledge our staff. We've had some heavy lifting, especially with the transportation infrastructure bill that this committee has helped shepherd through the House. And we've got a great legal team. I appreciate Joel, appreciate Jeremy. I call him sometimes on weekends, and and he's always very, very handy, very helpful, and eager to assist. And I can't say enough about my assistant, Sarah. She's a wonderful LA, and we've got a great intern this year that's we hate to lose her, but Paula's has been a great addition. And as the chairman said, it's a team effort, and I appreciate each and every one of you. Any other questions or comments? I think the thing you've been waiting for is Transportation Committee is closed pending the call of the chair.